The issues affecting you. Revealed, explained, discussed. Now on WGAL 8 In Focus.
Hello, I'm Susan Shapiro. Pennsylvania does not allow cameras to record in courtrooms. It's one of only 5 states with this stipulation. The others are Delaware, Iowa, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. The debate about allowing cameras in Pennsylvania courtrooms has been ongoing for years. Tonight, we'll talk with a state lawmaker who's pushing for it, the state victims advocate about what it could mean for victims who have to testify, and we'll hear from a former federal judge about the impact on the courtroom. We're putting the debate over cameras in the courtroom in focus. Joining us now is Representative Jamie Flick of the 83rd House District, which includes part of Lycoming and Union counties. He has introduced legislation that would allow video and audio recordings in Pennsylvania courtrooms. Thanks for being here.
Yep, my pleasure. Thank you.
Why now for this type of legislation?
Well, that's a great question. I just think the timing is now. Cameras in the courtroom already happen in 45 of the 50 states. Historically, Pennsylvania is very slow moving to get any type of legislation passed, whether it's medical marijuana, you name it. It's just very slow. And the technology is there now. The technology moves like the speed of light, quite honestly, as we've seen just in the last couple of years. So I think it can be secure, and I just think it's time.
What kind of restrictions would this bill have?
Yep, there'll definitely be restrictions. We certainly don't want video of the jury. We don't want anything tainted. We don't want sexual assault crimes to be videotaped. We don't want children to be videotaped. So there would be restrictions. We would look to see what other states are doing and probably follow those guidelines.
Who would operate the cameras? Would this be courtroom personnel or outside personnel?
I think, again, we would look to see what other states are doing. That's something I haven't considered. But yeah, we would see what other states would do on that and see where the funding would come from for that.
And certainly now, as we have in our studio, we have robotic cameras.
Yeah.
So that could be an option too.
It certainly could be.
A lot of people have said this would allow for grandstanding and that kind of thing from not only attorneys, but perhaps the judge himself or herself. I
think pros and cons to that. I think this goes out to the public. Right now, the public, much of the public doesn't even know they can go into a courtroom anytime, right? Anytime there's a case, they can sit in on that. So if there was grandstanding by the judge or by witnesses even, it could be anybody that does the grandstanding, they would be called out by the public. I think the public would have some control over who's doing the grandstanding. So. Do
you think the judge should have some discretion in whether the camera should be rolling in his or her courtroom?
Yeah, I think maybe the court administrator. But I don't think if you've got 7 Court of Common Pleas judges, for example, in your county, and one definitely does not want to be videotaped, I don't think that particular judge should have a say in it. So I would look at the court administrator in each county, or maybe the president judge as he or she passes that down to the other judges.
What kind of educational value do you think this could have?
I think it's great. It would be a great opportunity, not just for you and I, but for young students at college. There's just, in my district, I've got Pennsylvania College of Technology and Lycoming College. Students could sit in their classroom and actually watch and analyze a case that's going on. It could be a mundane case or it could be a murder trial. So great educational value. It would also give people that are scheduled to go into court that have maybe ever been there before, and they have to take the stand. It's very, very intimidating when you're up against a judge. They would get to watch some of this to see how the process works. And I would say that holds especially true with pro se litigants, those people that are defending themselves. It's extremely expensive to go to court and get an attorney. So if you look at the number of pro se litigants today as opposed to 10 years ago, it's exponential. So it would give them, an opportunity to see how things run.
Certainly reporters are in the courtroom and there's a transcript should you want that. Why is that not good enough?
Yeah, good question. With a transcript, if you look at what a court reporter does, and they've done a great job for, my gosh, a century, and you read a transcript, and I'll just give you an example, Susan. A transcript could say, well, Mr. Flick, you could have filed this motion 6 months ago and you chose not to. Not a very good idea on your part. Pretty simple. So if you get the transcript and you read that, very innocuous, right? It's like, okay, well, the judge told him that. If you have cameras in the courtroom and you see that happen, the judge might say the exact same words that you just read, but he could slam his or her fist down, stand up, robe flies open, foaming at the mouth and saying, Mr. Flick, you could have done this 6 months ago. You chose not to.
Now, that's a personal experience you had, correct?
That actually happened to me, yes. But it's not just me. So
So are you taking a personal thing and trying to make legislation out of it? Or?
Yes, absolutely. But not just me. Many of my constituents had called about several different judges. And to be fair, we have some great judges in Union County and Lycoming County and all across the Commonwealth. But if you look at the flip side, Pennsylvania ranks up there really when you think about kids for cash, right? If we would have had cameras in the courtroom, then what would have happened? If you look at the number of attorney generals that we've had go to prison, we are not the cleanest state. Thank God for Illinois, because they might be just a little more corrupt than us.
What's the likelihood of this passing? Obviously, it's going to take some time.
It's going to pass. I mean, I won't quit till it does pass, but it will take time. What I've learned, if nothing else, and I've only been in the House of Representatives for 2 years, is all of these things take time, and they are political. You've got to get support. If you look at the House of Representatives, you know, it's very, very close. There's one vote difference, so we need support from the other side. If you look at the Senate, that's close. And at the governor. So we've got Republicans and Democrats, very mixed bag. So it will take time.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yep.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And coming up on WGAL 8 in Focus, we'll speak with the state's victim advocate about how cameras in the courtroom could affect victims.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus. Coverage you can count on.
Joining us now is Suzanne Estrella, the Commonwealth Victim Advocate and the Director of the Office of Victim Advocate. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, tell me, what is the Office of Victim Advocate?
It's the state agency with the duty and the authority to advocate for the individual and collective rights of all crime survivors. I serve with an office of 30 advocates where we collaborate with local county victim witness offices to make sure that the crime victims' rights are upheld and restored and centered in the process.
How do you do that? In different ways?
Yes, we have very different services that we provide. We provide notifications to crime victims who register with our office on offender movements in and around state correctional facilities after someone has been sentenced to a state correctional facility. We also work to make sure that there are pathways to healing and hope for crime survivors through various programs we provide. We provide online support groups. We have a Resilient Voices program where survivors who want to speak and share their stories as part of their healing journey participate in that program. We have programs that allow for victim offender dialogue, when survivors want to meet with the person who caused offense as part of their journey to healing for both parties, and we facilitate that program. And we are constantly collaborating with other service providers to make sure that survivors know how to access what's available to them and how to find their way through the system.
Interesting. So what is the office's position on cameras in the courtroom in Pennsylvania?
Well, as the office that really supports crime victims and what victims want, we recognize that there is no one victim response because people are different. Crime victims are our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, people in our community. And as people, they all have their own different opinions on what's right and what's best for them. And we believe that it's our responsibility to uplift what the victim wants and support their right to have their say and their choice in the way that they see fit. Pennsylvania law provides for crime victims to have rights. They have the right to be informed about the process, the right to take part in the process, and the right to be restored. So it's important that any avenue, anything that's going to impact that, addresses that right for that victim. So providing a survivor the opportunity to have the choice, we feel, is the most important. So if a survivor feels like, hey, I want cameras to be in the courtroom, then we're going to support that choice. If a survivor feels like, for maybe safety reasons, just reasons that will impact them or perhaps re-traumatize them, they don't want cameras in the courtroom, then we also want to be able to support that choice.
So you think the judge should ask the victim whether or not they want the camera there or not?
Definitely. I think that's crucial to making sure that pathways of justice are clear for all crime survivors.
Why do you think cameras, obviously in many of these trials there are reporters taking notes and we get video outside of the courthouse. Why do you think the cameras might make a difference to the victims?
Well, some of the stories, some of the trauma that people go through is very personal. When you think about some of the crimes that people suffer through and the intimate personal details you might not want that broadcasted. There may be information that you don't want to share with the public. There could be serious safety issues, especially when you think about gun violence and crimes that affect more than one person in the community, gang violence. There could be very serious safety issues that a person is concerned with, so that they don't want their story or their statements televised.
But yet their stories are being told by reporters who are in the courtroom. But you think there's a difference if there's a camera there?
I think there's a definite difference. I think about the anxiety, even coming to this type of interview, knowing that the camera's here, the level of anxiety and how that increases. And if you pile that on top of the trauma that a person is already suffering just by having to relive the worst thing that ever happened to them, I think that should be that person's personal decision. Do you want to relive that in front of the public, or would you not want to do that?
On the flip side, do you think there are some victims who might, welcome cameras being in the courtroom for their
that's
trial?
a possibility, yes. Many people realize the power of storytelling and the ability of storytelling to kind of change the culture, and having the opportunity to have your voice elevated and magnified throughout the community so people can hear what happened from your point of view. I think that may be exactly what some crime survivors are looking for, and it could be a plus in the healing journey and in, I think, making community members aware and becoming involved to bring about needed change.
If there was a camera, what would you advise a victim who was going into court?
I think you have to make sure that you be yourself, be honest, and just to know that this story, even while you're thinking that you're going to be able to share your story in your way, because you don't have ownership of that recording, there is going to be that possibility that there could be sensationalism, that people are then going to scrutinize what you said and the way you said it. It kind of might open the door to some victim blaming, which we hope that we can steer people away from. But I think that we have to be honest that those are parts of the puzzle that may come into play.
It's definitely an interesting debate, isn't it?
It is, for sure, yes.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. We appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up on WGAL 8 in Focus, we'll speak with a former federal judge about his take on cameras in the courtroom.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
Joining us now is Judge Lawrence Stengel, a former U.S. District Court judge for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania and a Commonwealth Court judge in Lancaster County. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here, Susan.
What is your position on cameras in the courtroom?
My position has evolved, I would say, over the years. I think there was a time when I thought they were a bad idea. I've come to think in recent years that it's probably not just a good idea, but a very good idea.
Why? What changed your mind?
I think there's a strong educational component to having cameras in the courtroom. There's a lot of misconception about what goes on in courtrooms. I think the credibility of the system is sometimes under attack, and I think that it would be helpful for people to be able to see what goes on each and every day in the courtrooms around the state and around the country.
A lot of people have argued that it can be a distraction, that the camera's there, that
Sure.
people might grandstand for the cameras. You don't see it that way?
Well, we were talking off camera about the Hauptmann trial, and there were objections
Which
to,
goes way back, right?
way back,
Yes.
the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. In that case, the cameras were very large and intrusive and on dollies, and of course that would be a distraction. Today, the technology that's available, proceedings could be televised with a very minimum of any interruption or distraction. In fact,
Yeah.
I would argue almost no distraction.
Well, that's a good thing from our point of view. It's interesting that you've evolved on this question. Do you think in any way it can ensure a fairer trial?
I don't think so. I don't think it has any bearing on whether the trial itself is fair. I think it has more to do with the opportunity for the public to view public proceedings. Now, what goes on in the courtroom is a public forum, and the public should have the right and the opportunity to view what goes on. You know, back in the day, I guess back in the early 50s, the famous trial in Lancaster County was the Edward Gibbs trial, the F&M student who was arrested and convicted of murder of an employee of the college. People lined up down the street to get into the courtroom for that trial. There was a high level of interest. The newspapers covered it. And it's difficult for people to get into the courthouse.
Yeah, and there's very limited seating in most courtrooms.
Exactly. And I think it would be helpful for people to. In fact, I think that the more people have a chance to see what goes on in the courtroom, the higher the credibility of the court system and the justice system would be in the community.
The victim advocate brought up that this should be up to the victim in the trial. How do you protect a victim who might be on camera? Should it be up to the victim?
Sure. The victim has absolutely rights in the process, but I don't think it should be victim-driven. I think the trial judge has the discretion to decide whether certain participants in the proceeding ought to be protected. And if there is a victim of a crime whose situation is particularly sensitive or has objected to their participation being recorded, then I think that says something very strong to the judge, and I would expect most judges to protect that victim. I think one of the great risks of cameras in the courtroom is intimidation of witnesses. People might not be willing to take the stand if they think that their picture, their voice, their presentation is going to be broadcast and today forever memorialized.
But there's certainly ways to protect that kind of thing.
There are ways to protect, just like there are ways to protect jurors. There are certain high profile trials where jurors are at risk. That doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. Sometimes we use anonymous juries, where the jury is behind a screen so that the defendant and the defendant's supporters can't see the jury. And that can certainly be done. There can be exceptions made to a cameras in the courtroom policy to protect jurors, to protect witnesses, to protect victims. But I think I would disagree that it should be victim-driven. I think the victim's interest should be highly valued, and I would expect most trial judges, as they do now, to give great deference and weight to the experience of the victim. Because you wouldn't want someone who is an important witness in a case, victim of a crime, for example, to hesitate at all about coming into the courtroom.
Because there's a camera there.
It's stressful enough, and
absolutely.
Sometimes people balk at coming into the courtroom, but there are protections in place, and we can use those protections.
All right, well, stay with us. We'll talk about why the federal courts have been resistant to this idea and some of the high-profile cases we've seen on TV.
Sure.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
We continue our conversation about cameras in the courtroom with Judge Lawrence Stengel, who was a former U.S. District Court judge for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania and a former Commonwealth Court judge in Lancaster County. Why do you think the federal courts have been so resistant to this idea?
Great question. There was a pilot program in the early 90s where the federal courts allowed cameras in the courtroom to see how it went. A friend of mine tried one of those cases back, I think, in 1991 or 1992. 35 cases went to trial with cameras in the courtroom. There wasn't an appeal issue relating to the cameras in any of those cases, but the Judicial Conference of the United States decided to not adopt a policy allowing cameras in the courtroom. So I think.
So even though no appeals, they still didn't go for it?
The federal courts like pilot programs, and so they tried it out, and for whatever reason decided not to go forward. I think there's always been the concern that it's a distraction, that it could impact negatively on the victim's experience or witness's experience. People are stressed enough when they come into court to testify. let alone thinking that or not being aware that a camera is recording it and their presentation is being televised, in their community or nationwide.
Yeah, we've certainly seen some high-profile cases over the years
have.
on television, from O.J. Simpson to more recently Alex Murdaugh. Right. Do you think that those involved grandstanding for the cameras, or do you think that may have happened even if the cameras weren't there?
Well, in the legal team representing O.J. Simpson were high-profile people who were not afraid of the camera, and I think they would have made their public statement, maybe extrajudicial public statement anyhow. Do I think they played to the cameras? Maybe, somewhat.
But you don't think it affected the outcome?
I don't, and I think it put the judge under tremendous pressure.
Yeah.
He was criticized for.
Judge Alito, right? Was that
Judge Lance Ito.
Ito,
right,
excuse
right.
me. Yeah.
And so Judge Ito, I think, seemed to me to be very methodical, careful, and yet he was criticized by commentators. I don't think that affected his demeanor. I don't think it affected the behavior of the prosecution team. The defense team, I think, attacked the evidence. They attacked witnesses. They brought up issues of credibility. So I don't know that it had much. Had much to do with the actual jury's determination.
Certainly made for some memorable moments. That's for
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah.
And it was the birth of Court TV, and the major networks all adopted a policy of having legal teams advise their production staff on the coverage of the court system. We saw that in the Lambert case here in Lancaster County. There was an ABC team involved, and that they told me that was an outgrowth of the Court TV success, which caught the networks flat-footed during the O.J. Simpson trial.
Interesting. Do you think it'll happen in Pennsylvania?
Cameras in the courtroom?
Yeah.
I think it might. I think it might. I think to me, the overarching benefit to it is the educational component, and it allows people to see what actually goes on in the courtroom, and I think that's necessary today because there's a lot of criticism of the system. There's allegations of corruption, which I think there's corruption in every system, I suppose,
right.
but it certainly is not rampant or even regular in the court system. I would argue it's a very minor problem, but I think people should see that. They should see the evidence-based, methodical, reasonable, careful process that goes on all the time.
And how sometimes it's rather mundane, right, in the courtroom.
It is that. It is that, yes.
Thank you so much, Judge, for sharing your insights.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate
Good to
it.
be with you, Susan.
We reached out to two other organizations about whether they have a stance on cameras in the courtroom. The Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association has not taken a position on the use of cameras in the courtroom, but several district attorneys have raised concern about how it would affect the proceedings in their courtrooms. Berks County District Attorney John Adams said he's opposed to allowing cameras in the courtroom, saying, quote, "I think cameras would attract too much witness intimidation and potential retaliation." We also reached out to the Pennsylvania Association of Broadcasters, which tells us its board of directors has not taken a position on the issue of cameras in the courtrooms. While most states allow cameras in courtrooms, there are strong arguments for and against it. The group plans to monitor lawmaker debate and will issue a position as it moves through the General Assembly. Thank you for joining us for WGAL 8 in Focus. For all of us at WGAL, I'm Susan Shapiro. And join us again next Saturday night at 7 o'clock for WGAL 8 in Focus, right after NBC Nightly News. And you can watch each episode of In Focus, plus WGAL's latest newscasts, original programming, and more. Just download the Very Local app and stream for free on Roku and Amazon Fire TV.